Career in armed forces is no longer a profession only meant for men. In the early 90s, armed forces in India started recruiting women cadets on short service commission. I am Raksha Sharma, a student of class 10. I have often dreamt of a career in the defense forces. Today, I have the opportunity to interview an esteemed squadron leader who has served in the Indian Air Force. Come, let us find out what it takes to have a career in the defense forces. Here we have G.R. Anuradha, who has served in the Indian Air Force as a squadron leader. I am really honored to be talking to you today, ma'am. It was really nice of you to come. Anuradha ma'am, what inspired you to join the Air Force?
Like most girls of that age, when I was in school, I always wanted to do something, extraordinary. Actually, my intention was to get a job and get independent as early as possible. And of course, the lure of uniform was there. I was always awestruck when I saw uniformed personnel. And when I was in my graduation, the ads were out in the papers for recruitment of women into the armed forces, and I applied immediately.
And what are the minimum requirements needed to join the armed forces?
You've got to be a graduate, number one, depending on the kind of job that you're going to be recruited into. That I will broadly classify into two types, that is the flying branch and the ground duties branch. For the flying branch, you've got to be a graduate with science and maths as your subjects. The other branches, that is ground duties branches, you have accounts, you have administration, medical, technical. So depending on what job you're going to do, you have to be qualified for that. For example, for the administration branch, you have to be a graduate. For the education branch, you have to be a postgraduate, that is MSc, MA. Then for the technical branch, you have to be an engineer or a postgraduate with AMIE. For the medical branch, you have to be an MBBS and so on.
Okay, so what were your apprehensions on the first day of your training?
I had no clue about what I was getting into. It was just that I was mentally prepared for whatever there was going to be. I was confident that I would get through with whatever I was trained for.
And can you give us a brief description of your training?
We had an initial training, that is, I was in the flying branch. So we had an initial training of 6 months on the basic trainer aircraft. Alongside, we were also trained to be tough personnel of the armed forces. For that, we had to be physically fit, and to ensure our physical fitness, we had various activities like we had parade, we had sports, and we were trained to work under stress. That was the major emphasis, that armed force personnel have to give sustained performance under stress. Thereafter, I was trained for my specific aircraft, that is, we had 1 year training on helicopters. And alongside, we had theory, we had to study the aerodynamics, we had to study general service knowledge, and the customs and etiquettes of the armed force.
Can you tell us about your significant achievements?
I did many things which I wouldn't have probably if I had not been in the armed forces. For example, as a helicopter flyer, we did mercy missions. We did casualty evacuation of people who were stranded, who were ill in very remote areas. I served in the Northeast for almost 4 years, and as everybody knows, the road infrastructure is not very good. So we had a lot of remote places where people had to walk days together to get to the nearest medical facility. So we had to evacuate such people who required immediate assistance, medical assistance. We did search and rescue for crashed aircraft, for missing personnel. We also carried out disaster management activities like flood relief and relief for earthquake victims. Beyond that, we had avenues to carry out adventure activities like parajumping, skiing, rafting, hand gliding, and various other mountaineering and various other activities.
What are the different challenges you faced during your career?
First and foremost, as a lady officer, I was entering into a totally new area which was a male bastion all along. So the male officers were generally looking up to women with chivalry, and they had apprehensions whether we would be able to work and perform under similar stress conditions. But then the first act of ours was to prove them wrong, and which I'm sure we did. So beyond that, our work culture was similar to what the male officers did, and we participated in most activities which they did. So it was a challenging career, challenging activity initially, but over a period of time we got acclimatized and adapted ourselves accordingly.
I'm sure you did. Did you ever get a chance to fly fighter planes?
In the Air Force, women are not being inducted into the fighter stream as yet. But of course, I did get joyrides. Talks are on. I mean, for example, in the other countries, women are being inducted into the fighter stream. So I'm sure in future this will be a part of Indian Armed Force.
Okay, so ladies are not allowed to go in the war front.
Not exactly. There is a difference between flying a fighter plane and going to the war front. During war, there are many roles that a warrior has to play. We are all air warriors. So a medical officer, for example, would be operating in the front, assisting, giving support to the frontline activities. Similarly, a logistics officer would be out there in the front, a technical officer would be out there in the front. And being a helicopter flyer, we are also doing a lot of activities which are involved with direct operations in the front line.
What is the advice you would give to a student who wants to take up a career in the armed forces?
First of all, I would like to say that please have it as a career option. If you have the aptitude, if you have the spirit to join the armed forces, then please go ahead. Right now, people don't know much about the armed forces, but the government is taking initiatives to introduce this subject at school level so that students know what life is all about in the armed force. So I think this is to be taken seriously as a career option, just as a student would take up engineering, would take up medical or any other law.
Can lady officers continue to be in service even after marriage or childbirth?
Definitely, if you're physically fit, if you are suited to the role that you're supposed to play, then you can.
And how long can one continue in the armed forces?
Women are being inducted into the Short Service Commission, which as of now is of 10 years initially. Thereafter, they are given the option for extension, which is also depending upon their performance, which they have given in the first 10 years. So you can continue up to 15 years using your extensions.
And what are the other avenues available for someone in the armed forces?
Like I mentioned, you can also pursue your adventure activities. You could do para jumping, snow skiing, gliding, rafting, and many other activities. You can pursue sports seriously. So, apart from being an armed force officer, you can be all these things too.
Can you relate one of the incidents that seemed the most challenging during your career?
I was moved by a particular incident where a person in a remote village of Arunachal Pradesh was seriously injured. He would have taken more than a week to get to the nearest medical facility, walking through thick forests. So the moment we got the message, we were immediately airborne. We found the particular village and located the victim. Thereafter evacuated him and brought him to Itanagar hospital. I think the satisfaction that I got from that particular incident stays with me. It stays with me till date.
Now that you have 2 children, as a parent, would you allow your children to join the armed forces?
If they show the keenness, definitely. This will be one of the options for them, and I will not hold them back.
Thank you, ma'am. It's been a pleasure talking to you. This interaction has surely made me more determined to join the armed forces.